Primetime Politics tonight. The nation's capital braces for another big protest weekend, but law enforcement officials vow there won't be a repeat of the February occupation. I'll speak with this expert about what to expect. Budget or election platform. The Ontario government pledges new spending and tax cuts just days before the launch of the election campaign. Ontario's Finance Minister will be here to discuss his new fiscal plan for Canada's most populous province. And our panel of political commentators on the Rolling Thunder protest, the Liberal NDP deal in Parliament, and more. The Ontario government tabled a budget today, but it's really more of an election platform ahead of a provincial vote happening on June 2nd. The budget promises $158 billion over the next decade for infrastructure projects, including highway improvements. The budget also confirms billions more in spending already announced for new hospitals and long-term care. It includes $1 billion more for home care and a tax credit for lower-income seniors. It also promises a tax cut for Ontarians earning less than $50,000 a year. And the budget forecasts deficits for the next several years, but the Finance Minister is not really clear on whether he's prepared to commit to this same budget if his party wins the election. Peter Bethlenfalvy is Ontario's Minister of Finance. He joins me now from Toronto. Minister, good to see you. Thanks for taking time to speak with me this evening. This budget won't be passed by the legislature. It adjourned right after your budget was unveiled today, so it really is an election platform. What's the pitch you're making to the people of Ontario?
Well, we're being very transparent by tabling this budget and giving a path forward for the people of Ontario with a real plan to rebuild Ontario's economy after a couple of years of the pandemic. And what this will mean will be better jobs and more jobs and bigger paychecks for the people of Ontario. We've got a plan that invests in workers to give them the skills and retraining and reskilling so they can succeed. And of course, building infrastructure. We're building highways, we're building hospitals, transit, broadband, housing right across the province. So, of course, we need the workers to do that. And of course, by building, we'll be able to, for example, in highways, get people out of gridlock and spend more time with their family. We're focused on bringing costs down for families right across the province so they can have a little bit more money in their pockets. And finally, we've got a plan in this budget to stay open, and that means building more hospitals, building more hospital beds, building infrastructure, and hiring more nurses so that we can have better home care and better service right across the province so we can stay open.
At your news conference today, you repeatedly declined to say if you are re-elected on June 2nd that you would reintroduce this very same budget. So I'm asking you that question again tonight. Will you propose this very same budget if you are re-elected June 2nd?
Well, absolutely, and that's something I said. We are very transparent and clear that this is the plan, that we're asking for a mandate from the people of Ontario. And if we're fortunate enough, Peter, to get a majority government, informed government on June 2nd, this is the plan that we're going to table for the people of Ontario. So I can think of no better way, as I said in the conference, than to put this to the people of Ontario for them to pass the budget that we've put forward in this plan. And of course, we're committed to getting it done. We're already getting it done by getting shovels in the ground, bringing manufacturing jobs back. You know, the previous government, they talked about a lot of things, but they didn't build hospitals. They had debates and they didn't build long-term care. They had committees, but they didn't build highways. They had focus groups on building subways. They didn't build them. Okay. We've already started building things across Ontario, getting shovels in the ground, and we're going to continue doing that.
The deficit has been declining, but that deficit will rise next year thanks to billions more in infrastructure spending with borrowed money. You could have balanced the books by next year, but you've chosen to wait until 2028. How come?
We're rebuilding this province and investing in infrastructure, as I just said. I think we've got the balance right, Peter. The deficit is coming down versus what we thought it would be a year ago. We're bringing the debt to GDP down by 8 points from a year ago. We're balancing the budget 2 years faster. And of course, we want to grow the economy. We want to grow the pie. We want to get things done. And so that will help the fiscal situation. And, we're very clear on how that we're going to do that. And of course, with the leadership of Premier Ford and our team, who's been doing it since day one, and through the pandemic, we're gonna get it done with this plan.
But in life before politics, you were a bottom line guy, and you campaigned on promises to cut the deficit and cut government spending. But this budget doesn't cut spending. What caused you to change that approach, to believe it's a better time to spend now than it is to cut?
Well, we've seen the pandemic laid bare, really, for all to see how the lack of infrastructure investment over 15 years by the previous government really put the province in a very vulnerable position. I believe in building infrastructure because these are long-lived assets. We're doing it at still very low interest rates, and this is good for our economy. It's good for growth. It's good for hardworking people's jobs, the skilled trades, getting more people. 1 in 5 jobs will be in the skilled trades. So you can see right across Ontario, whether we're opening up the far north with the Ring of Fire and getting those critical minerals, not from China, not from Russia, getting them here in Ontario, that will go into the batteries that we're going to have manufactured in Windsor. Big announcement there, 2,500 new jobs coming. That will ultimately go in those electric vehicles, where we're going to lead North America. We got a plan to build 400,000 new electric vehicles by 2030. That's bringing jobs back to Oshawa and Durham, to Windsor in the southwest, to Oakville, to Ingersoll, to Alliston. So, this is a very robust plan, and it's done in a very fiscally responsible way.
Let's talk about housing. As you know, it's a major challenge in Ontario. It's a major challenge across the country. Supply is a big issue. Your own provincial task force says you need 150,000 new units each year for the next decade, and yet the budget predicts less than 90,000 units a year for the foreseeable future. What's the plan to close that gap?
So we have a plan, and we announced today that our target is to build 1.5 million homes over the next 10 years. So on average, 150,000 new homes a year. We've tabled legislation and passed it that will cut red tape, that will speed up a permitting process. We'll collectively work with the federal government. Great to see they followed our lead on providing support for housing building. We're going to work with municipalities, and we're getting it done. And let me tell you, last year, Peter, over 100,000 homes were built. That was the highest level since 1987 in almost 35 years. So there's no magic silver bullet that's going to happen overnight to get this done, but we have a very clear plan, and we're going to table legislation every year for the next 4 years to continue the path to making sure we hit that 1.5 million target. Okay,
Finance Minister for Ontario, Peter Bethlenfalvy. Minister, good to talk to you tonight. Thanks for your time, and hope we get a chance to talk again.
Absolutely, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
Well, there's building tension in the nation's capital ahead of big protests planned for this weekend, and promises by police to ensure they will not be a repeat of the protest occupation we saw in February in Ottawa. As many as 500 motorcycles, maybe more, as the weekend rolls on, are expected to begin rolling into the capital Friday night, part of a series of demonstrations featuring a number of different groups for a variety of causes this weekend. The organizers of the Rolling Thunder ride, as it's being billed, all have some connection to the Freedom Convoy that occupied downtown Ottawa, including Parliament Hill in January and February to protest COVID-19 restrictions. One group coming this weekend, the Freedom Fighters, features guest speaker Chris Sky, a well-known opponent of vaccine mandates who has a history of arrests, bigoted statements, and has been charged with uttering death threats. But the main organizer of Rolling Thunder is distancing himself from Chris Sky and promises his motorcycle event will be peaceful and focused on veterans and free speech.
Our event has always been about the veterans. It's always been about the monument. And it's always been about the bikes driving around and saluting the monument, plain and simple.
The City of Ottawa will be closing off much of the downtown core and access to Parliament Hill to any protest vehicles. No stopping will be allowed at the National War Memorial. As many as 800 police reinforcements are being called in from other forces.
The goal of this weekend is to maintain community safety and public safety on our streets as this event unrolls. We do know that there's been a fracture in trust between our community and the police service as an outcome of the occupation in February. One of the things we've been very focused on through this is making sure that we listen to and hear our community's concerns about these events and roll out a plan that takes those into account. We believe that's what we've developed.
People certainly have the right to protest peacefully, and I want to emphasize that no illegal activity will be tolerated. We're stepping up enforcement, and there will be significant consequences for people who break the law.
Michael Kempa is an associate professor of criminology at the University of Ottawa. He's with me now. Professor, good of you to take the time to talk with me tonight. I appreciate it. What do you think the nation's capital's in for this weekend?
Well, we're looking at a significant protest coming back to the city. I very much doubt that it will be on the scale or duration of what we saw in January and February. That was very much what we would look at as almost like a lightning in a bottle situation, where we've seen these types of protests. People have been trying to organize them for several years now, and it was only when they had a real opportunity with a lot of public rage around COVID vaccine mandate issues and frustration with what people saw as government overreach that their movement took off in ways that I don't even think they expected at the organizers. Right. This time around, most of the mandates have been lifted. There are still some people out there who would like to see some vaguer ideas of freedom develop, but it won't be on the same scale.
What do you think of the way police are preparing and letting the public know how they're preparing for this protest compared to what we saw in the Freedom Convoy protests earlier this year?
Well, it's fundamentally different, and it's, I would say, rather than being new, it's remembering the authorities that they've always had to control the flow of people and traffic through space. Has nothing to do with interfering with legitimate protest. Individuals are allowed to assemble to peaceably express their views as long as their views are not hateful or inciting violence. This does not mean you're allowed to bring your vehicle anywhere you might like to at any moment and leave it somewhere. This is just about the police doing something that they've done for Canada Day celebrations in the past. Mm-hmm. And I would say that this can be what we expect in the future, where every time there's a large planned protest, whether it's coming from the political left or the political right or wherever, there'll be a much greater degree of police control over the flow of people through the city, right across Canada, in fact.
Right. This protest is happening without the tools of the Emergencies Act available to the police, or the state of emergency declared at the time by the province of Ontario back in February. How do you think that changes the police response and the preparations?
Well, to my mind, the Emergencies Act only became necessary because the ordinary responses were too slow and poorly coordinated and, in a sense, rusty. We'd forgotten how to do this through many years of essentially peace and quiet in the nation's capital and elsewhere, very minor protests leading before then. And the thing got out of control to the point that the civil power just couldn't restore it without the Emergencies Act. So this time around, it's about doing what we're meant to be doing long before the situation gets out of control to the point that the civil power breaks down. Also here, we're looking at something that's in Ottawa. We're talking about a motorcycle convoy of some form. We don't have a rolling thing across Canada at the moment that's also blocking national borders into the United States, critical trade routes, allegations of and discovery, in fact, of weapons, such as they were in Coutts, Alberta. It's just not on the same magnitude or nature at this time.
Let me ask you about one of the things we saw in February. Freedom Convoy protests. Protesters ended up occupying the downtown core, taking over streets and neighborhoods. It became a real challenge to try to push them out. Is there any way to stop that from happening again if motorcyclists or others decide they're going to camp out and try and repeat what happened here in February?
Yes. Number one, the police are going to have the personnel power that they need to immediately enforce ordinary city bylaws. So you heard the interim chief of police, Steve Bell, for example, said there will not be one barbecue set up in the streets, which I thought was sort of a nice little image of what he has in mind. There's ordinary bylaws that prevent people from having open fires, open alcohol, disruptive forms of not just banners, but things that could be turned into weapons, like long pieces of wood and so forth. So these things can just be enforced if they've got the numbers, which they do. There's 800 additional police officers already sworn in, ready to go from the RCMP to the Ottawa Police Service.
All right, let's finish on this. This week, the federal government announced a public inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act, as it's required to do by law, based on the order in council, the terms of reference for the judge leading the inquiry. Do you have faith this process will provide the answers Canadians want into why this act was invoked?
Canadians will get the answers that they are able to drum out of the government. What I mean by that is, governments always hold back some information. They'll claim the national interest, cabinet confidences, and so forth. The national interest doesn't have like a tidy definition in the dictionary. It's whatever people say it is. So if the public demands that the government release everything that is not part of either an ongoing investigation or a legitimate terrorism concern, then that is hopefully what the public will get. But if we don't ask for it repeatedly, and with quite organized messaging, you're very unlikely to get it. Governments hate giving up that kind of information.
All right, Professor Kempa, great to talk to you tonight. Thanks for your time. Take care.
Thank you indeed.
I want to bring in our panel of party commentators now. Greg MacEachern is a Liberal commentator. Melanie Paradis joins us this week. She's a Conservative commentator. And Kim Wright is an NDP commentator. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being with me this week. Greg, look, I think we all, well, not Kim so much, but the three of us lived through February and January in Ottawa. Now the city's bracing for another big protest this weekend. That stoked lots of worries that we'll see a repeat of the Freedom Convoy occur once again. Greg, let me ask you, and the police are blocking off access to Parliament and everything else, blocking streets around Parliament Hill. What do you think? Is it the right reaction or is it an overreaction?
It's the right reaction. I hope it's enough this time. As you said that, Peter, I was surprised. My reaction of anger and anxiety starting to rise as soon as we hear this. And I'm about a block from the old red zone. So I think it is the right thing. I mean, what's problematic, I think, for the federal government is that the tool they had to use was the sharpest tool in the kit, and it was the Emergencies Act. And, I'm hearing Conservatives, continue to criticize this. They're not talking to people in Ottawa. I'm getting provincial literature in my mailbox from the provincial PC candidate. I wish him a lot of luck on the doorstep, because I think he's going to hear from a lot of angry people, because the province of Ontario was invisible during the occupation. And, when we think about it, if you can't handle lofty ideologies like Nazism or white supremacists, remember that these people treated people's backyards in Ottawa like bathrooms. It's disgusting. So when you see a politician with their arm around one of these people from one of those old photos, where they're trying to defend them right now or talk about the Aga Khan rather than this, keep in mind, these are the type of people that they supported. All
right, so there's lots of lessons learned from what happened in January and February, and clearly the police are trying to apply them here, Melanie, trying to get out ahead of this. But there are some people saying, look, taking this kind of action ahead of the event, shutting down access to Parliament Hill, shutting down access, at least in some measure, to the War Memorial. Certainly they won't be allowed to stop their motorcycles there, won't be allowed to get to Parliament Hill. What's your view of this? Right reaction or overreaction?
No, I think it's absolutely a fair reaction. The Ottawa police, this is an issue for them to determine what the best course of action is. And that's exactly what they're doing. It sounds like from their press conference today that they've got a plan, that they're taking this pretty seriously, and they're making it clear to people that they won't be tolerating any encampments, and they shouldn't.
Kim Wright, what are your thoughts?
Well, goodness, I don't think they're going to bring in a sauna this time like they did in the last round of protests. But look, how do you get
a sauna on a motorcycle? I guess that's
who knows? I'm always surprised at how they built their own huts for their propane tanks under the watchful eye of Ottawa police last time. So who knows how they'll do it this time. But look, the reality is every weekend in downtown Toronto, there is a convoy protest of some sort, and police come in and they shut off certain streets and they manage the situation, and they come in, they protest, and they go home. That's how this works every single weekend in downtown Toronto, and hopefully the Ottawa police have learned lessons of how to manage their own city this time.
All right, Melanie, let me stay with this conversation a little bit in the context of this weekend's demonstration. It comes as the Prime Minister, announces this week a public inquiry, which he has to do by law, into the use of the Emergencies Act. But we have the government sending pretty clear directions here. It's not prepared to waive cabinet confidence to release all of these documents that, although they're saying perhaps on a case-by-case basis that Justice Rouleau might want to see. Do you have any concerns about transparency in the process to investigate and to look into why the government used the Emergencies Act and whether the focus is in the right place, on the government as opposed to on the protesters?
Well, absolutely. And I think that cabinet confidence is an easy excuse to avoid that transparency. And people should be asking more questions and we should absolutely expect more disclosure on this.
And why do you think that's important? Why do you think that if there's a judge overseeing this, that he's not the right person to get whatever transparency he needs to get on behalf of Canadians?
Well, I mean, I think it's why do they have to claim that it's cabinet confidence? They can't disclose that to the judge. Is he going to be the one who's deciding what the committee reviews? I think that it's just not really clear to people what to expect here in terms of what the disclosure will be, what the level of transparency will be.
Kim Wright, do you have any concerns about how this process might unfold?
No, I think that there's a lot of people who are trying to finger wag that he's a former Liberal staffer from 1.5 million years ago. And if that was the case, I don't think anybody in and around the Ottawa area would ever be appointed to anything. Look, the transparency aspect of this is absolutely necessary. This was the first time that the Emergencies Act was being used. In what context was it being used? I think that's where Canadians have been looking for some clarity. Is this just a simple situation of the insurance and the financial records? Were they actually seeing some very troubling things? I mean, we saw some images that were startling coming out of Ottawa last time with the little kid with the jerry-canned backpack. Those kinds of things were very disconcerting to Canadians. Now, the bigger question I have, Peter, is going to be how are the leadership candidates for the Conservative Party leadership going to play into this? I mean, they went for pizza last time and all sorts of hugs with them. Here, Poilievre did a press conference earlier today that didn't show a lot of freedom loving from his perspective when he was taking some protesters away or some of his people. So I like when they talk about freedom, but I guess the question is, what does freedom actually mean to some of these leadership candidates that are shouting it at every opportunity?
Greg, can we have full transparency in this investigation into the use of the the Emergencies Act without waiving cabinet confidentiality?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, this is brand new territory. It's the first time the act was used. I would caution, there's not a lot of people in Parliament that served in a Harper cabinet, but there is a reason why we have cabinet confidentiality. And I think that's important to remember. When you move into opposition, I guess maybe perhaps in a post-Trump world where, lying means you never have to say you're sorry, but you may have to live with this. So if you're saying that you're in favor of that now, well, maybe does that mean we can open up some of the decisions that the Harper cabinet made? It is a really slippery slope. It exists for a reason.
Okay, let me flip to our last topic of conversation here. I want to talk about the Liberal NDP deal in the House of Commons. Kim, let me start with you. Jagmeet Singh is now coming out forcefully against the Liberals over the climate plan, but I guess I'm wondering, what kind of credibility does he have to criticize the federal government, the federal Liberals, when he's already agreed that he's going to provide them support to keep them in government for the next 3 years?
Well, as we've talked about previously, Peter, this was never a blank check. There was never we were giving over our responsibilities as an opposition party. When we have concerns, we raise them. When we have issues of disagreement, as we have on some of the approach on climate change, we're going to raise them, and certainly we'll raise them on ethics.
Right, but let me just ask, what's the effect of it? You mentioned the check analogy. So, like, if you have a bad check, the bank bounces it, and that's that. What's the effect of of speaking out and criticizing if people know you've already said, I don't like what they're doing, I don't like a lot of their policies, but I'm good with them being in power for the next 3 years?
So the only thing that we have agreed to was on supply and confidence. So we are voting with them on the budget because it has actually done the things that they've talked about in terms of our agreement, including on dental care and making sure that that's actually written into the budget, not just promised. So on the other things that are in front of Parliament, we are absolutely in front of this, and there's no reason to think otherwise.
Okay,
we're an opposition party.
Melanie, let me hear you on this.
So I think that Jagmeet Singh actually hit the nail on the head earlier this week when he said that workers really need to be at the center of any government action on climate change, and he highlighted the fact that 170,000 fossil fuel industry workers are facing an uncertain future right now. And I believe he used the words like economic calamity that needed to be prevented because there needs to be an actual government plan, and there isn't one. He called it a complete failure. I think he's actually right. The problem is he's not backing that up with any action. They're just words, and they're words that he's using strategically to shore up support, specifically with unionized labor, who will bear the brunt of this economic calamity that he's warning about. But the question remains, like, will he put his money where his mouth is and actually vote accordingly? All right,
Greg, let me hear you on this. What's happening?
Well, I would challenge what Melanie just said. In terms of the only form of accountability, then, is a confidence vote, which would happen a couple of times a year. If that's the case, the Conservatives should stop going to question period. Peter, cancel this program. You know, there are lots of other ways to keep a government to account rather than just the confidence motions. I'm not surprised by this. The way that I understand the deal is, you know, similar to things I've experienced in my own working life in Nova Scotia, late 90s, where we had the PCs on board for one election. I stood next to my boss, the Minister of Transportation, next to a bunch of potholes, next to PC MLAs. The budget passed that year. The legislature continued on.
Right.
I don't.
Did you ever say to minority government, it's, you know, short of a vote of confidence, you guys are good to go? I mean, actually, the analogy would be that you say we're not going to vote you down on any vote of confidence. That's basically a blank check, isn't it?
Well, this is a formal arrangement where I think there's been a lot of occasions we look back that there were very informal arrangements. I like this because it gives some certainty. You know, do the Conservatives really want to go to the polls right now? Candice Bergen in a national leaders debate, is that what the party really wants? Let's be, be serious here.
Well, to your point, though, I believe that the Liberals, the Liberals do want to avoid having the Conservatives at question period, which is why the Liberals are trying to change the House sittings. They want to be able to adjourn early. We have to adjourn early. That's the conversation for another day. But thank you all for your time tonight. I do appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
That's all for another edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Peter Van Dusen for all of us here at CPAC. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.